I remember the exact smell the moment I stepped into Emma's house, like cinnamon had just been pulled from an oven and mixed with warm wool and faint floral cleaner. It was the kind of scent that said this is someone's home, not just a house. I wiped my shoes automatically at the doormat, even though it wasn't raining. Like the place asked for respect without saying a word. Emma wasn't downstairs yet. Her mom answered the door instead. I'd seen her maybe twice before, once in a grocery store parking lot waving from the car, and another time when she dropped Emma off at campus. But in those moments, I hadn't really looked at her. Now I did. She wasn't what I expected. She had that stillness some women wear like jewelry, like every movement was thought through, soft but deliberate. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands escaping near her cheekbones. No makeup. Or maybe the kind you don't notice until you're trying to figure out why someone looks so striking. She wore a slate gray sweater that looked expensive in a quiet way. "Daniel, right?" she said, smiling like she already knew the answer. "Yeah," I nodded, unsure if I should be formal. "Nice to see you again, Mrs. Lowell." She tilted her head a little, amused. "It's Helen. You're not 12. She stepped aside, motioning me in, and I followed the sound of soft music and a distant ticking clock. The walls were lined with photos: Emma, at 7 holding a stuffed owl, a graduation picture with a crooked cap, someone's birthday with a chocolate cake slightly melting. "Emma's still getting ready," she said, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "She's not great with clocks, in case you haven't noticed." I chuckled. "I've noticed. Sit," she said, gesturing toward the couch. "You want cocoa? I make mine the right way." I didn't even know what the wrong way was, but I nodded. "Sure." She disappeared into the kitchen, and I sat on the edge of the sofa, trying to look casual, while my eyes wandered over the space. The living room had that curated warmth: books on side tables, a folded quilt over the armrest, coasters already placed as if guests were always expected. It didn't feel like Emma, exactly. It felt grown-up. She returned with 2 cups. The mug she handed me was thick, heavy, the kind with a chipped edge and a faint floral print that had survived a decade or 2 of dishwashing. When our fingers touched as she passed it to me, there was a softness to the moment that didn't belong to strangers. "Careful," she said, looking up at me as her hand lingered a fraction longer than it needed to. "It's hot." Steam curled upward like something theatrical. I nodded, gripping the mug more like an anchor than a drink. "Smells amazing." She settled into the armchair opposite me, her posture relaxed but precise, like she was used to company and knew exactly how to host without trying. "Emma told me you're studying literature." "Yeah, mostly modern stuff. I'm trying to finish a paper on grief narratives, but it's been kicking my butt." She smiled. "You can say ass, Daniel, I won't tell the dean." We both laughed, and I felt myself exhale a little. She had a way of looking at people that made you feel like she already saw the layers you usually keep buried. I sipped the cocoa, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "You know," she said after a quiet moment, "Emma used to write poems when she was little, terrible ones. But she always gave them to me folded like secrets." I smiled. "She still folds her notes like that?" She looked at me, and for a split second, her expression softened into something that felt nostalgic, sad. I couldn't read it, but it stayed with me. The sound of footsteps overhead broke the moment. Emma's voice called down, a quick, "Be there in a sec." Helen stood. "Well, I've hogged you long enough." I stood too, the cup still in my hand. "Thank you for this." She glanced at the mug, then back at me. "Of course, it's good to warm someone up before the hard questions start." She left the room with a smile that felt like it meant something else entirely, and as I stood there, holding a cup of cocoa that was suddenly more than just cocoa, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight wasn't going to go the way I expected. Emma finally came downstairs 20 minutes later, barefoot and half apologetic. her wet hair tucked behind her ears like she hadn't quite decided if she was ready to be present. She kissed her mom's cheek in passing and gave me that familiar, quick smile, the one she always used when she was trying to make up for being late without actually saying anything. "Sorry," she said, grabbing a binder from the kitchen table. "Got caught up with my hair. You've met the queen of cocoa." "I see." I lifted my cup slightly, the cocoa mostly gone now, but still warm in my hands. "She's got skills." Emma laughed and flopped onto the floor with her notebook. "Okay, let's pretend we're responsible adults." Group study mode activated. We spread out across the living room floor, like we'd done in library corners and coffee shop booths a dozen times before, but something felt slightly off. Not in a dramatic way, just a small distance that hadn't been there last week, like the words between us had thinned out, gone quieter. Emma was focused, but not really with me. Her answers were short, her eye contact fleeting. She highlighted aggressively and chewed on her pen like it owed her money. I tried to ignore it, to keep reading my section aloud, but I couldn't help noticing how the energy between us had a strange edge. Helen passed through the room, twice while we studied, once with a basket of laundry, humming something under her breath as she walked upstairs, once again to close a window, her fingertips grazing the curtain as she paused for a moment too long near the doorway. She glanced at me then just briefly and offered a soft smile, one of those looks that lands and lingers, even if it only lasts a second. When Emma got up to grab water from the fridge, Helen returned, stepping lightly into the room, as if she hadn't been watching from the hallway. She picked up a folded blanket from the back of the couch and laid it down on the armrest next to me. "For later," she said, smoothing the edge of the quilt. I nodded, not sure why my throat felt dry. "Thanks." She didn't move right away. "You doing okay?" she asked. Her voice was quieter than before, more like a whisper that didn't want to wake the room. "Yeah, just brainful," she smiled. "Welcome to adulthood." There was a moment, a half-breath where I thought she might say something else, but she didn't. She just touched the edge of the couch and walked back into the kitchen. Later, when Emma said she was going to lie down for a minute, I swear. "Just 10, she promised with a yawn. I stayed on the couch, flipping through the notes. I heard Helen moving around in the kitchen, soft sounds of a kettle, a spoon against ceramic. Then her voice came from behind me, gentle. "You want a refill?" I turned to find her holding a fresh mug, already walking toward me. I stood before I even thought about it. "Sure," I said, following her into the kitchen like it was natural. The lights in there were warmer than I remembered, dimmed slightly, like a restaurant at closing time. She poured the cocoa for me and leaned against the counter, arms folded, one slippered foot crossed over the other. I stood across from her, unsure what to say first. "Emma's lucky," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "For having cocoa on demand." Helen laughed, and her hand reached out to gently slap my shoulder. Nothing heavy, just a tap, but it stayed there a beat longer than it should have. Not awkward, just ... charged. "No," she said, "for having someone kind, attentive. That's rare." I looked down into the cup. The steam wasn't curling anymore, just warmth, fading. "She's great," I said, and it was true, mostly. Helen tilted her head, watching me too closely. But I met her eyes then, and maybe I hesitated too long. I don't know. Something feels a little off tonight. Her expression softened, like she knew exactly what I meant without needing details. Sometimes people are like weather. You pack for sun, and then the clouds just ... show up. I smiled. "Is that your way of telling me I forgot my umbrella?" "It's my way of saying, don't take it personally." The silence after that wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet, like a held breath. She turned, opened a drawer, and pulled out a spoon, then stirred the drink in front of me, like it needed her touch before I took it back. "Thanks," I said again. taking the mug. As I turned to head back toward the living room, her voice followed me. You're welcome. And Daniel. I looked back. Sometimes the space between people is just space, but sometimes it's waiting for someone to cross it. I didn't answer, just nodded and stepped away, unsure which kind of space she meant. Emma stretched out across the floor, eyes half-lidded as she let her highlighter drop with a sigh. I think my brain just quietly gave up, she mumbled, rolling onto her back. I chuckled, but I felt it too. The words in my book had stopped sticking an hour ago. She turned her head toward me, her cheek pressing into the carpet. Thank you for helping. Seriously, I just can't think straight lately. I didn't know what she meant by lately, but I nodded anyway. You did. Great. She gave a sleepy smile, then pushed herself up and kissed my cheek light. Absent-minded, almost like it was a habit she wasn't awake enough to mean. I'm gonna crash. You staying longer? Maybe a few minutes. I'll clean up, okay? She yawned and shuffled off down the hallway, one sock slipping halfway off. She didn't look back. I gathered the notebooks into a small pile, left them on the side table, and took a moment to breathe. The room felt bigger now without her in it, the kind of big that made you realize how quiet a house can get when only one floor is awake. The kitchen light was still on. It flickered slightly, as if even electricity had started to fall asleep. I moved toward it, intending to turn it off, but paused in the doorway. Something about the silence made it hard to leave. Like the night had paused too, waiting. Then I heard the soft tread of feet. She came into view, slowly, Helen barefoot, wearing a pale robe loosely tied at the waist. Her hair was down now, brushing her collarbone in quiet waves. She carried a mug in both hands, like it was something precious. I thought you might still be up, she said, like she'd been hoping I would be. I nodded, just about to head out. She didn't move aside. Instead, she gestured gently toward the table. One more cup. It's okay if you say no. I hesitated, but not for long. Yeah, I said, almost too softly. Okay. We sat at the small breakfast table. The overhead light was off now, just the low lamp by the counter, casting a yellow pool across the floor. Outside the kitchen window, the world was black and reflective. Inside, the air smelled like cocoa and lavender fabric softener. She sipped first, then looked over at me. You're quiet tonight. I gave a small smile. I think your daughter's study sessions are more intense than mine. She laughed quietly. Emma's always had this storm in her. Beautiful, but restless. I didn't answer, just wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into my skin. Helen tilted her head slightly. Do you mind if I ask you something? Not about school. I met her eyes. They were tired, yes, but not in a drained way. In the way people are when they've had to carry too much of themselves alone, sure. What were you like as a kid? The question surprised me. I sat back, considering. Quiet, I said. Moved around a lot. My mom worked nights, so I used to stay with neighbors. I remember thinking couches felt safer than beds. She nodded slowly, not filling the silence, just letting it rest. Sometimes, I added, I think I grew up trying to be whatever people needed. It made things easier. Helen's gaze stayed on me, but it wasn't heavy. It was gentle, present. I think I did that too, she said, in a different way. We sipped in silence for a few moments. Somewhere in the distance, the refrigerator buzzed to life and then stopped again. A clock ticked from the living room. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was thick, meaningful. I envy how you speak, she said softly, like you actually hear your own words before you say them. I looked down at the mug. Sometimes I think too long and say nothing. She smiled. Even silence says something. Then, with a breath so gentle, I almost missed it, she added, sometimes it's nice to talk to someone who sees you. I looked up, not knowing what to say. Her eyes didn't look away. It wasn't flirtation, it wasn't that at all, but it was connection. Like something tethered between us had just been acknowledged. The silence stretched again, and in that space I could feel the pull. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just human, warm and aching and unspoken. I stood slowly, not trusting myself to stay. I should go, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She stood too, her hand still wrapped around her own mug. Of course, we walked together toward the stairs. At the base, I turned to her. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but stopped short, her hand hovering for a moment before falling away. Good night, Daniel. Good night. As I climbed the steps, I looked back once. She was still there, standing in the dim hallway, one hand resting gently on the banister. The sleeve of her robe slipped slightly down her wrist, and then she turned and walked away, the faint whisper of her steps swallowed by the house. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring at her door. The hallway was dim, the kind of quiet that made your own breathing sound too loud. Downstairs, the kitchen had gone dark. The house had settled, like a lake after a stone's been thrown, softening into stillness. Emma's door was slightly open, just enough to show a sliver of light from her bedside lamp, just enough to suggest invitation, or maybe nothing at all. I didn't want to assume, but I didn't want to walk past it either. I reached out and tapped gently on the wood. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment I thought she might have fallen asleep. But then her voice came quiet, slightly rough with sleep. Come in, I was hoping you would. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. She was lying on her side, one arm tucked under her head, the covers pulled loosely to her waist. The lamp by her bed bathed the room in amber, softening the edges of everything. She looked smaller somehow, or maybe just softer. I didn't want to leave without saying good night, I said, my voice low. She shifted slightly, her eyes tracing my face as if trying to read something I hadn't said. You okay? She asked. I hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the stillness. Yeah, tonight felt strange. She blinked slowly, her hand reaching out to touch the hem of my sleeve. Strange how? I don't know, I said. Like something shifted, like the night's heavier than it should be. Emma didn't respond right away. Instead, she just looked like she was trying to see past my face and into whatever weight I was carrying. You don't have to pretend to know what you want tonight, she said quietly. Just be here, with me. I let the words settle. Then I nodded. She lifted the covers slightly, an invitation without pressure. I kicked off my shoes and slid in beside her. We lay there on our backs, not touching, just breathing in the same rhythm. The ceiling fan turned slowly above us, casting soft shadows that danced on the walls. I missed this, she whispered. What? This? You? Just being near? I didn't answer right away. There was something fragile in the moments, something I didn't want to crush with the wrong sentence. Instead, I turned my head toward her, our faces now close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath. Her eyes were searching, but not demanding. I reached out, slowly, and rested my arm across the space between us. She shifted closer, her head found its way to my chest, her cheek pressing lightly against the cotton of my shirt. Her hair smelled like lavender shampoo, still faintly damp. I let my hand rest on her back, not pulling, just holding. Present. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was everything else. It was safety, familiarity, trust. I stared at the ceiling, watching the slow arc of shadow from the fan, and I thought about how rare this kind of closeness is, the kind that doesn't ask for anything, doesn't chase a moment or a title, just is. I could feel the steady exhale of her breath against me, the way it warmed the fabric just over my heart. "You ever wonder," I said softly, "if we've been rushing through what's supposed to be slow?" She nodded against me. "Every day. I don't know what I want," I admitted, the words tasting raw. "Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow." Her fingers curled gently against my side, anchoring herself. "Then, just want this. For now." I closed my eyes, and I let myself want this. Not the answers, not the clarity, just her breath on my chest, the weight of her shoulder under my arm, the way the quiet between us didn't need to be filled. We stayed that way until the lamplight dimmed in my peripheral vision, and all that was left was her voice in the dark. "I'm glad you knocked," she whispered. "So am I said. And then there was nothing but the hum of the ceiling fan, and the rhythm of two people choosing, without saying it, to stay close, even when the world felt far. Morning came quietly, like it didn't want to wake us. A thin stripe of sunlight filtered in through the gap in the curtains, brushing against the blanket pulled halfway over us. The fan above us had stilled sometime in the night. Outside the window, birds were beginning their small, familiar rituals. But inside that room, time was slow, intentional, almost sacred. Emma was still curled against me, her hand resting just beneath my collarbone, her breathing soft and even. Her hair had shifted across my arm during the night, and a few strands tickled my neck. I didn't move. Didn't want to. Not yet. Downstairs, I heard the faint click of a kettle being turned on. A cupboard opened, porcelain tapping lightly against porcelain. Helen was awake. I didn't move. Emma stirred a few moments. Later, her hand flexed gently, and her eyes blinked open in the soft light. She looked up at me without moving her head, a small, sleep-heavy smile finding its way to her lips. "Morning," she whispered. "Hey," I said, my voice barely louder than the breeze outside. Her brow furrowed slightly, and her voice still low, still warm, asked, "You were going to sneak out?" "I thought about it," I admitted, "but I didn't." She nodded, then nestled her cheek a little closer to me. "Don't leave yet." So I did, single quotes too. We stayed there like that for a while, quiet, breathing, letting the morning unfold around us without rushing to meet it. Eventually, she rolled onto her back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her fingers still brushing against mine. "I know something's been off," she said, "between us." I didn't deny it. There was no point. "I guess I've been trying to make it feel like it used to," she continued. "Like if we just kept studying together, or joking the same way, we'd land back in that version of us, where everything made sense. And maybe," I said, "I've been showing up just enough to feel familiar, but not enough to be honest." She looked at me, not with hurt, but with understanding. "So," she said, after a long breath, "what do we do now?" I thought about that. Thought about the stillness of her room, the rhythm we'd found last night, quiet, tender, real. "We slow down," I said. "We stop trying to be the people we thought we should be and just see who we are." Her smile this time was smaller, but it reached her eyes. "I can do that." We got up slowly, no rush, no hurry to put walls back. Up. I helped her straighten the sheets while she brushed her hair into a loose ponytail. There was no awkwardness, no need to label what had happened, only a shared sense that whatever had cracked open last night, it mattered. I gathered my things, quietly. My jacket was on the back of the couch downstairs, my notes stacked neatly where we left them. As I reached for my bag, I turned to see Helen standing at the base of the stairs, holding a folded tea towel. We locked eyes. Her smile was soft but different now, polite, distant, measured. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied. She didn't say more, and I didn't linger. There was a silent understanding between us, as if both of us had felt something in the quiet of last night, and chosen, with grace, to leave it where it belonged. I turned toward the door when I heard, Footsteps behind me. Emma appeared with something in her hand. A mug. The same one from last night, chipped, slightly faded. Still warm from the rinse in the sink. Here, she said, placing it gently into my bag. A reminder of tonight. I looked at her. You want me to keep your mom's mug? She won't miss it, she said with a smirk. Then, after a beat, and maybe it's not hers anymore. We stood on the porch together, the early morning sun washing the sidewalk in soft gold. Birds called from somewhere in the trees, and the breeze carried the faint scent of toast and grass. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to mine just for a second. See you soon. Soon, I said, as I walked down the steps. The mug in my bag clinked softly against my notebook, and as I reached the sidewalk, I looked back one last time. Emma stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, hair glowing in the sun, watching, not waiting, just there. Sometimes, what you're offered isn't what you need. And sometimes, what waits behind an open door is exactly what you were afraid to feel.